They say Beirut never really sleeps. Even in war, its windows still glowed, cafes whispered, radios played, people danced. But on one spring night in 1973, something unnatural moved through those same streets. Not soldiers, not spies, something stranger. 11 men walked into Beirut wearing wigs, skirts, and perfume. They were commandos disguised as women, carrying silenced submachine guns and chemical explosives beneath handbags lined with false stitching. It was an operation designed to erase 3 men in 3 separate apartments without Lebanon realizing what had happened. At least, that was the plan. The human anchor stands in that first line of illusions, Ehud Barak, the commander. 31 years old. Precise, contained, unreadable. He had planned hundreds of raids. None like this. He looked into the mirror before leaving the ship's cabin and barely recognized the face returning his stare, his own eyes framed by eyeliner. He thought the disguise was clever. He didn't yet realize it was also a liability. That lipstick and nylon would make them hesitate in ways no enemy ever could. The disguise wasn't the only thing wrong. Half their intelligence was 10 days old. 2 apartments had changed tenants, and one of the targets, codenamed Cedar, hadn't been seen in weeks. That information should have stopped the mission. It didn't. At sea, the team's extraction code had just been revised after a failed radio check. But Barak's team never received the update. 2 hours before infiltration, Avi, the team's deputy, noticed the mismatch between the signal sheet and the transmission log. He pointed it out. Barak told him it didn't matter. The C unit will adapt. Avi didn't argue. He only wrote one note in the margin of his briefing folder. First flaw in the system: faith. When the boats began cutting toward the Lebanese coastline that night, there was no communication left with headquarters. Beirut glittered ahead of them. The city looked peaceful, but they were heading toward 3 rooms filled with loaded weapons and sleeping guards. Each commando had memorized 70 streets and 40 escape turns. A single wrong turn meant vanishing into the labyrinth. The disguises would fool distance, not scrutiny. Locals were used to foreign women moving in groups, but not at 2 a.m., carrying identical handbags and wearing running shoes under dresses. Barak had reminded them, no improvisation. But that word, no improvisation, was already impossible. Every minute inside Beirut meant adaptation. The city, the traffic, the civilians, they were the battlefield now. And every disguise, every radio, every signal was a bet. One wrong frequency, one misheard joke, one pair of eyes looking too long. Every mask carried its own risk. He had told them, before launch, our enemy tonight isn't the guards. It's the clock. The mission was not about killing, it was about timing. To strike 3 targets inside a dense city and vanish before dawn required precision that didn't exist outside paper. That night, the team walked off the sand into the lights of a foreign capital, looking almost human, yet carrying the power to restart a regional war. Somewhere ahead, someone already knew they were coming, and none of them would know it until the first door blew open. Retaliation orders had come quietly, sealed under classification strict enough to erase fingerprints. It wasn't a campaign, it was vengeance. The directive was simple: remove 3 men tied to Munich. What made it impossible was everything else. The targets were high-ranking PLO leaders living under the protection of Beirut's fractured militias. They didn't share an office or a neighborhood. They lived miles apart, guarded separately, surrounded by families and civilians. To hit one without alerting the next was unlikely. To hit all 3 in a single night verged on madness. Yet, Mossad's operational command had signed off. In Tel Aviv, the planners believed surprise would compensate for risk. Beirut's security agencies were still recovering from internal chaos. No one expected Israelis to walk its streets disguised as women. Barak didn't design the plan. He inherited it. The framework came from the intelligence branch, the timings from Naval Command, and the disguises from an idea floated over coffee weeks earlier. A joke that became real. But the more impossible the mission looked, the deeper its approval traveled up the chain. Fear transformed into fascination. By the time the final briefing ended, everyone wanted to believe it could work. Avi didn't. He kept a quiet distance, watching Barak's confidence harden into something that resembled denial. To Barak, doubt was contagion. To Avi, it was oxygen. 48 hours before departure, surveillance photographs arrived showing one of the targets, the poet and spokesman. Kamal Nasser, standing on a balcony with a young boy. A child no one in intelligence files had recorded. Collateral probability under 2%, a controller had said. 2% sounded low, but 2% of 3 apartment blocks was still a child. That number stayed in Avi's head. He wondered who measured morality by percentage. Inside a sealed room in Haifa, they rehearsed on mock apartments. 10 seconds from breach to clearance. 5 from withdrawal to regroup. The engineers had compressed the timeline until it no longer resembled reality. Beirut wouldn't sync with their stopwatch. Then came the last update before embarkation, a coded message from Naval Command. The extraction pattern changed. The offshore boats would no longer wait at the North Terminal Channel but reposition 2 miles south. Barak acknowledged the message but didn't inform the full team. Information discipline, he called it. That choice would become their first hidden cost. The men boarded disguised. Their wigs were synthetic blonde and jet black, cut to Western tourist styles. Their clothing was tailored in Tel Aviv's theater department, the laces of their shoes hidden under stockings. As each one emerged on deck, silence filled the cabin. Humor had carried them through training, but now the transformation drew only unease. No one looked heroic, they looked absurd, and that absurdity made the danger real. Barak moved through them methodically, checking straps and weapons. When he reached Avi, he hesitated. "Still think this is insanity." Avi answered quietly, "Not anymore." Insanity implies choice. The boats moved north. From the horizon, Beirut shimmered, part nightlife, part rubble. Somewhere beyond the shoreline were the apartments where 3 men slept, unaware their names were written on paper in another language. The shore team split into vehicles. 2 taxis, 1 van posing as a wedding service. Barak rode in the first taxi beside a local contact whose loyalty was leased, not owned. The man's silence was unnatural. He had been paid double to keep it. Halfway into the city, a checkpoint appeared that wasn't on the map. Lebanese militia, not national police. The driver's hand tightened on the wheel. The barrel of a captured M16 pointed lazily toward their headlights. No one spoke. The soldier stepped close to the window, leaning in, studying Barak's face framed by makeup and a scarf. A single breath held. He stepped back, waved them through. The disguise held, but the relief didn't. If that guard had recognized what he saw, the operation would have died before it began. That brush with discovery burned deeper than any gunfire. Avi's van trailed behind at distance, but something was wrong with his receiver. Static so heavy he couldn't track Barak's signal. The encryption key was misaligned by 1 frequency band. He adjusted, amplified, still nothing. Then 1 pulse came through, faint, distorted. He could make out half a phrase, "Go dark until confirmation." Which confirmation? The one before entry or after? He had no idea. That uncertainty followed him deeper into the city's maze of lights, where everyone looked familiar and nothing felt stable. The mission that should have been impossible was already happening. The cost it would demand, no one could yet measure. And somewhere, in one of those apartments, a man was still awake, watching television. How had he known to stay up so late that night? The city looked smaller from the inside. Streets folded into one another. Names changed twice on the same block, and every 3rd car was a taxi that never stopped moving. Barak's team drifted through that motion like ghosts, visible yet unnoticed. What held them together wasn't confidence anymore, it was silence. Avi's radio was still malfunctioning, only catching fragments of Barak's transmissions. Static climbed through the headset, and the same 4 words repeated in a loop: maintain, adapt, go dark. He didn't know if it was a command or an error echoing back from interference. The first location, Kamal Adwan's building, waited near the Corniche. Intelligence had described it as lightly guarded, 2 bodyguards, maybe 3. That estimate now felt like mythology. From the taxi window, Barak could see shadows moving behind the curtain on the 2nd floor. Too many, 4, maybe 5 silhouettes, one of them holding something metallic. Everything the intelligence photos had promised seemed inaccurate. He had a choice: proceed blind or wait and risk synchronization with the other units breaking down. He chose to proceed. They slipped out of the vehicles near an alley overflowing with trash bins. A streetlight flickered. throwing the wigs into flashes of blonde and black. The irony wasn't lost on Barak. The disguise worked better in motion than in stillness. Every pause revealed the strangeness of their appearance. In stillness, they looked like mistakes. Avi's van stopped at a cross street 200 meters away. He couldn't see Barak anymore, only the sound of distant cars. He knew his next phase depended entirely on a visual light signal from Barak's position. 2 flashes meaning target 1 engaged, 1 flash meaning hold. But the building stood behind an angle of wall, partly hidden by eucalyptus trees. He wouldn't see any flash. He waited. Then a crimson stutter reflected off a window pane. 1. Then 2 bursts of light. Wrong color, wrong pattern, but it looked like a sign. Avi signaled his own team to advance. This was the first shard of fracturing, each man watching a different truth unfold, each convinced he saw the right signal. Inside the first building, Barak's unit moved quick. Plastic explosives pressed into the doorframe, a fiber cord run through the hallway. They stepped back, 1 flight down, and the corridor lit up with a dull, dense crack. The entry was violent, but brief. Inside lay chaos, gunfire, shouts, confusion, but within 30 seconds, the floor fell silent again. Barak didn't wait for identification. They swept the apartment, confirmed what they needed, and regrouped. The first strike, though messy, was technically flawless, yet it didn't feel like victory. When they exited through the back alley, someone across the street was standing in a doorway. A woman. She wore a robe, eyes reflecting the streetlight. She had seen everything, the wigs, the guns, the smoke. Barak met her eyes for 1 moment too long. She backed inside, no alarm, no scream, but her memory would survive longer than the mission itself. Barak marked it mentally, witness unknown tracking risk. They had to disappear now. 2 more apartments waited across the city, each expecting silence from the others. Barak's watch showed they were 10 minutes off schedule. Avi didn't know that. He was already moving. The second target's building was wrong. Kamal Nasser, the poet, the spokesman, was supposed to live in an apartment with a green balcony facing a pharmacy. The coordinates matched, the photos matched. The guards at the gate matched. Everything fit except the nameplate. It read, Youssef Al-Khattab. Avi froze at the entrance, heart hammering against uncertainty. He reread the mission folder. The address was right, but intelligence had described Nasser's building with a marble staircase. This one was tiled linoleum. Unless he had moved recently. Unless Tel Aviv had missed the update. He whispered to his lead operator, either he moved or this address is a ghost. The operative stared back. Orders? Barak's voice came through the headset, static, broken, indefinite. Something about Phase 2, confirm, disruption. No clarity, no context. Avi made a decision not based on certainty but fear of delay. We go. They breached quietly this time, a lock pick instead of a charge. A soft entry for what they hoped was a soft target. Heard inside was normal life. Wallpaper, books, a half-set dinner table. They advanced in silence, every step pressing against dread. The bedroom door was half open, a light on, a man asleep. Avi leveled his weapon and stopped. The face wasn't Nasser, it was someone completely different, younger, possibly civilian. The realization broke the rhythm of the operation. Nobody fired, nobody spoke. They were inside the wrong house. The hidden cost began here, because that hesitation, that human breath of doubt, was enough to make time real again. Downstairs, a dog barked. A door slammed open. Avi realized the lower tenant had heard them. He whispered, "Abort." But another voice, on another channel, already said, "Target secured, proceed to third." Barak had assumed both assaults were done. He didn't know the second team never found their mark. That wrong assumption rewired everything downstream. Avi's unit barely escaped. 2 shots fired in the dark staircase. 1 bullet ricocheted and grazed a commando's arm. The smell of cordite filled the air. They spilled into the alley. Half their equipment scattered, adrenaline burning through coherence. There was no fallback point now, not with confusion spreading between teams. The comms network imploded into overlapping bursts of data. Move, move, Phase 3. Verify extraction. South 2, someone said. Barak, probably. Avi tried to respond, only static returned. For the first time since leaving the shore, he wondered whether anyone would come back for them. Barak regrouped his men near the Corniche and tried to re-establish communication with Naval Command. The radio operator tapped repeatedly, sending the coded phrase for completed sequence. No response. He assumed it was transmission interference caused by the coastline. But far offshore, the command boat had already shifted position, misinterpreting that same signal earlier in the night as an abort directive. They started moving south. The extraction point vanished without anyone realizing it. Back on the mainland, Avi's injured commando leaned against a wall, bleeding. The disguise wig stuck to his forehead, melting under sweat. A Lebanese taxi passed slowly, driver staring. The commando lifted his hand to wave him off, but it looked like a greeting. The car stopped. Barak's team was supposed to be 3 minutes away. They weren't. The driver rolled down his window, curious. His eyes fell to the blood. Suspicion bloomed. Avi raised his weapon under the fabric of his bag, uncertain if the man was armed or just lost. It no longer mattered. Every second drew lines of consequence too tangled to escape. He let the car drive away. At least he thought he did. But a few blocks later, that same driver stopped at a police booth and spoke to an officer. Unseen, the first local alarm spread. Somewhere in Beirut's warren of roads, a radio operator for Lebanese intelligence scribbled a note, "Foreign intruders, possibly Israeli, Verdun area." The signal transmitted upward, and within minutes, the western quarter began to lock down. The window for extraction went from hours to minutes. Inside the third operational vehicle, tension cracked the team's precision. Barak's closest operative, a man known for utter calm, asked the question everyone had avoided since departure. What if we call it? What if we abort? Barak didn't answer. He stared out of the window, watching the streets turn from quiet to crowded with checkpoints. Abort wasn't an option. To abort meant admitting you'd lost control. He wasn't ready to do that, not yet. But Avi was. Static filled his headset until one phrase broke through, faint but undeniable. South Channel compromised. He didn't know what it meant, but he felt what it implied. No exit, no reinforcement, no certainty. Just Beirut. He whispered to himself, "We may not leave this city." In that moment, two operations existed in parallel, one that believed success was unfolding according to plan, and another already disintegrating in confusion. Between them stretched the distance of miscommunication and the space where mistakes become history. The assassination plan still had one target left. The teams were split, the extraction misaligned, and the city waking. None of them knew that every choice from this point would collide. Barak checked his watch again. The timing was still wrong. The disguise was wearing thin. The sun was climbing faster than they could run. For the first time since stepping onto Beirut's sand, the face in Barak's mirror, painted, disguised, absurd, felt heavier than it looked. He started walking toward the final address anyway, uncertain whether he still controlled the mission or whether the mission now controlled him. They reached Hamra Street just after 3 in the morning. The city had changed tone, nightclubs closed, shopkeepers rolled steel shutters over their windows, and stray dogs picked through trash piles. Any other time, this was the safest hour, when the city dozed in its defensive rhythm. But tonight, it listened. Somewhere, radios whispered rumors of foreign agents, and police cars drifted without sirens. Barak didn't know that yet. He thought the chaos had stayed contained to the Verdun district. He believed the street ahead was still asleep. That was the incorrect assumption that would define everything that followed. Avi's team, half lost somewhere behind, never found the rendezvous corner. They'd gone north instead of west, trusting a streetlight pattern that matched their map. Beirut's signage had switched to Arabic script last year, and the narrow intersection names were no longer visible. By the time he realized they'd missed the turn, Barak's unit was already walking toward their final target, Yusuf Najjar's apartment building, alone. Barak had rehearsed every step of this approach, 3 blocks down, across a fountain square through a narrow side alley. It looked manageable on paper. Now, the city's geometry shifted beneath his feet. Map distances were longer, street corners steeper, shadows thicker. The fountain square played a trick on perspective. It reflected light from 2 directions, disorienting them. The point man slowed, uncertain. Barak motioned forward anyway. Hesitation was worse than error, he told himself. Error could be corrected. Hesitation multiplied. It sounded logical in his head until, of course, logic ceased to matter. The false start came at the doorway. According to the latest intelligence, the entrance to Najjar's complex had 2 guards, one posted at ground level, another inside the stairwell. When they arrived, and no one stood outside. Quiet entrance, easy access. They exchanged glances. Luck or a trap? The ground floor smelled clean and sharp, fresh detergent. Someone had just mopped. That was wrong. No one cleaned stairwells at 3 in the morning. Barak's lead man placed a boot on the first step, then stopped. A faint click echoed from the second floor, metal on tile. A door latch maybe, or a safety being disengaged. Every instinct screamed back off, reassess, abort. Barak exhaled slowly and signaled hold. The team froze halfway up the stairs. No movement above. Silence settled like dust. Then the silence broke, from behind them. The side door creaked open near the entrance, a janitor emerging with a bucket, eyes widening. For one terrifying second, he saw everything. The wigs, the guns, the faces too angular beneath women's scarves. He blinked, confused, trying to process what he was seeing. Avi would have shot. Barak hesitated. That hesitation cost them the silence they'd carried all night. The janitor dropped the bucket, water spreading across the floor. Barak lunged forward, grabbing the man, pressing him against the wall, whispering a command in Arabic to stay quiet. The janitor froze, trembling. Barak couldn't kill him, not like this, not unarmed and unthreatening. He signaled 2 men to keep him restrained. They resumed upward. At the second-floor landing, a figure appeared. A bodyguard, half-dressed, weapon slung low. The detonation charge was already set. Too late now, a flash, brief, white, deafening. Screams from upper floors, dogs barking outside. The sound spread beyond the building before the smoke cleared. This was the near-abort moment. Barak knew the window had closed. Too much noise. The Lebanese patrols already had directions to check disturbances near the coast. Every second spent here dragged them closer to exposure. Abort? Someone whispered behind him. He looked toward the stairwell, then back at the smoldering hallway. One chance left. The target was only a room away. Delay meant failure. Retreat meant suicide. 30 seconds, he said. They entered the apartment. Minimal furniture, curtains fluttering from the shockwave, a radio still playing faintly in the background. Najjar sitting upright in bed, confused, reaching for something beneath the pillow. Barak fired once, a single suppressed shot. The man fell back, the shocked breath still leaving his lungs. Barak didn't check identification, he already believed. He'd seen the photographs too often not to believe. In the hallway outside, gunfire erupted, short, sharp bursts. One of their own firing downward into the stairwell. Someone had followed the explosion noise, maybe another guard. The mission's delicate cadence collapsed into raw noise. Avi's team, blocks away, heard the shooting through the radio static and thought it was signal confirmation for extraction. They turned south toward the beach, believing the mission was complete. It was the second fatal assumption of the night. Back inside the building, Barak's group regrouped near the stairwell. The hostage janitor remained pinned downstairs, alive, but shouting now. They couldn't risk killing him without alerting the street. Barak ordered silent withdrawal, no lights, tight formation. One of the men moved to collect a map case from Najjar's desk, hoping for documents. A small victory could still justify the risk. When he opened the drawer, sparks flared, a contact trip, a home alarm. Najjar had wired part of his desk to a simple electric trigger, old, improvised, but enough. The shrill alarm screamed through the night. The building erupted with noise and voices. Windows opened, heads appeared, neighbors shouting questions into the dark. The commando with the wounded arm stumbled. His blood was beginning to clot, sticky beneath the glove. Every trigger finger shake was a potential mistake. Outside, Barak saw headlights corner the street. Police, not army, but bad enough. They cut through an alley parallel to Rue Madame Curie, but the narrow passage ended at a locked gate. The escape diagram hadn't shown it. The map was a year old before renovations closed the passage. Trapped. Someone suggested blasting through the gate. Mubarak almost agreed, but explosions would bring everyone. He scanned the wall. 2 meters high, rough plaster, wired at the top. They could climb it with bare hands, but one touch of the wire and the whole alley would glow. Electric deterrent. He didn't know if it was live. "Try it dry," he said. The point man threw a length of cloth over the wire, climbed. No shock. Dead circuit. They moved. As they vaulted the wall, the false release moment arrived. On the other side was quiet. No sirens. No shouting, no lights. Just a silent courtyard filled with laundry lines and the smell of jasmine. It looked like safety, the kind of calm that tricks the nervous system into thinking the storm is over. They stopped for breath. One man laughed softly, ragged, unable to stop shaking. It sounded almost human again. Barak knelt beside the wall, recalibrating. Maybe the mission could still end cleanly. They would move south, signal the boats, extract. The worst was behind them. That's what he told himself. The quiet lasted exactly 30 seconds. The courtyard gate at the far end opened. A man stepped out holding a flashlight and a pistol. Another followed. Local militia, maybe police, maybe someone responding to the noise. They looked as surprised as the Israelis felt. Barak fired first, 3 quick pops. The men fell without sound. But the light from the flashlight rolled across the courtyard and illuminated their faces, foreign female silhouettes with guns. Anyone watching from above would see enough to piece the disguise apart. The illusion dissolved completely. Another sound rose from the street, a whistle, a call, the first patrol coordinating. The fragile calm shattered again. They sprinted along the east wall, cutting toward the beach road. The disguises now worked against them, hair tangling, skirts catching on debris. They tore fabric, discarded wigs mid-run. Identity stripped down to survival. Avi's voice crackled through the radio. Broken. Desperate. Extraction window closing. It's not the south channel anymore. Repeat position wrong. Barak barely caught the words. It confirmed what he feared. The boats had shifted. He looked east, the faint shimmer of sea under dawn light, and forced his men onward. False starts circled the night like echoes. Every signal meant something different depending on the ear hearing it. Every victory opened a new wound. They crossed a busy boulevard just as the first military jeep appeared at the far corner. Headlights slashed the road, sweeping past them without stopping. Luck or blindness, it didn't matter. They were one turn from the beach. Then another figure emerged. A civilian bystander stepping out of a kiosk, staring at them. Barak raised his weapon instinctively but stopped again, that same hesitation returning from the janitor earlier. He couldn't keep killing watchers. He waved the team past and left the man frozen in the doorway. That man would later describe what he saw to investigators. Foreigners, wigs half torn, moving like soldiers who had forgotten their uniforms. At the shoreline, the air smelled of salt and diesel. Waves broke quietly against the sand. No boats visible, the sea was empty. Barak scanned the horizon, waiting for the shape of inflatables, a glint of metal, anything, nothing. The radio sputtered once and went dead. Someone said, "They're late." Someone else corrected him, "We're gone." They hid among the rocks, hearts pounding, watching Lebanon wake. Behind them, sirens swelled. The city wasn't asleep anymore. Barak considered calling it, scattering inland, finding another route north. Maybe exfil through the Christian zones. But that meant abandoning the wounded. That meant the mission transforming into the thing Mossad feared most: survival without deniability. A faint engine hum drifted in from the dark. Barak turned. A small light, distant but approaching. Maybe boat, maybe patrol. Hard to tell. For a moment they allowed relief, false, fragile, seductive. The operation might still close cleanly. Then tracer rounds arced over the water, red lines slicing the dark. Someone was firing from the shore opposite, maybe thinking the boat was an enemy intruder. Or maybe it was. No one knew. Everyone moved. They plunged waist-deep, holding rifles high, running toward the sound. Every second tightened the circle around them. In that confusion, smoke, seawater, adrenaline, they didn't notice one thing. On the rooftop they'd left behind, the janitor they'd spared stood watching, phone in hand, calling the police again. The mercy Barak couldn't suppress had found its consequence. The last images of that night were chaos layered on confusion, disguises dissolving in seawater, engines screaming through gunfire, and dawn breaking over a city pretending not to notice what it had just witnessed. The mission wasn't over, not yet. But control was already gone. And in its place lived only the kind of uncertainty no after-action report could ever erase. The extraction wasn't clean, it never could be. The final boat arrived late, minutes, but minutes inside a city like Beirut might as well have been years. The surviving team splashed through the surf, pulling one another aboard under the rising light of a blue-gray dawn. They didn't know who had already made it south and who hadn't. There was no head count, no signal verification, no clarity. On deck, Barak sat drenched, makeup half-washed by seawater, staring at nothing. The disguise that once hid him now sat like a joke, smearing across his neck. Someone asked if they'd confirmed all 3 kills. He didn't answer. He wasn't sure. Avi was last pulled aboard. His wounded man collapsed near the engine, mumbling something about wrong buildings and wrong faces. The medic said it was shock, but Avi could tell the words were deliberate, half confession, half warning. They left Beirut behind, burning faintly on the horizon. The skyline looked deceptively calm, columns of smoke mingling with early light. Behind them, sirens echoed along the waterfront, not yet knowing what they were responding to. Mossad wanted silence. Beirut gave them chaos. Hours later, as the boats reached international waters, Naval Headquarters re-established contact. Secure line, coded phrase, cold voices. Barak responded mechanically. Mission executed. Extraction intact. Casualties none. He avoided the word success. The officer on the other end repeated something odd. Secondary targets confirmed. Barak froze. There were no secondary targets, or at least none he'd been briefed about. He looked at Avi. Avi looked back. Neither spoke. That silence between them carried the weight of the night's question. Whom had they actually killed? Because one address had been wrong. One signal had been misread, and the first man Barak thought was Yusuf Najjar might have died by assumption, not certainty. No one wanted to ask, not yet. Bureaucracy would polish the results anyway. Beirut would call it terrorism. Tel Aviv would call it retaliation. History would call it precise. But the field smelled of mistakes, not precision. By morning, the operation had ignited more than headlines. Phones across Arab capitals rang before breakfast. PLO command in Beirut counted 3 dead senior officials, though no one could agree exactly how each had fallen or why the Israeli teams vanished so quickly. What mattered wasn't loss. It was humiliation. The strikes carved deeper fractures into Lebanon's political geography. Militias turned checkpoints on each other, hunting the leaks that allowed Israeli gunmen into their capital. Panic spread upward. If Mossad could walk through West Beirut disguised as women who could be trusted anywhere? What Mossad didn't expect was what came next. Retaliation wasn't immediate war, but a slow tightening. A network of cells that began to reform, reorganize, and redefine their targets. Intelligence analysts in Tel Aviv months later called it the rise of distributed vengeance. The PLO learned from the same playbook Mossad had written. Decentralized, mobile, surgically impatient. The name Munich faded into the name Beirut, and Beirut became a classroom for everyone watching. Back home, the operation looked perfect on paper. 3 names crossed out. High-value leadership decapitated. The world woke to the image of an agency that could strike anywhere, even in the heart of its enemy's capital. Politicians used that illusion as policy currency. Strength sold better than doubt, but strength is expensive. Power is maintenance. The silent cracks began in private briefings. Questions raised about radio interference, about unauthorized civilians witnessing escape routes, about the traceable currency used to pay local contacts. Nothing explosive, just administrative dust. Yet that dust could bury careers. The first inquiry wasn't about the targets. It was about the disguises. Why the reliance on theater tactics in a live kill operation? Whose idea had it been to use female impersonation to avoid detection? The theater department staffer who advised the costume build was quietly dismissed within a week. Then came press. A Norwegian newspaper leaked fragments from intercepted radio traffic, Hebrew voices under female aliases calling each other by partial names during the night of the strike. The exposure smeared Mossad's anonymity, though never fully verified. Each revelation turned the brilliance of the night into a liability. The very absurdity that made the mission legendary made it traceable. In intelligence, fame is the opposite of safety. Tel Aviv tried to seal it off. Official channels refused to acknowledge. Unofficial ones glorified it. Documentaries would later call it flawless. But inside the service, perfection had already been replaced with a whisper, Beirut syndrome. That phrase meant overcommitment to risk, tunnel vision disguised as composure, mission logic that rejects abort permissions. It became a cautionary shorthand. Years later, when new field officers trained in the same desert complex as Barak once commanded, instructors described Beirut only through filters, decisive, daring, executed in extremis. No one described the janitor, no one mentioned Avi's radio. The mythology replaced the memory. But the memory refused to disappear. It lived in the men who had to remember it privately each time an order sounded too easy. In the years that followed, similar operations carried traces of that night's pattern: synchronized kills, simultaneous extractions, deceptive disguises. The techniques repeated, the flaws recycled. History never cleans itself completely. For Barak, the aftermath arrived as insomnia. Not guilt, just instability. A mind that replayed the night in wrong order. The janitor's eyes came before the explosion. The sound of the bucket hitting tile preceded the mission briefing. Cause and effect collapsed. He wrote after-action notes obsessively, trying to rebuild sequence, but the puzzle never aligned. Avi's version was quieter. He didn't speak during debriefing. I answered only in fragments. Within months, he requested reassignment to logistics. He had survived the field, but not the ambiguity. His file described him as reliable, but risk-averse. Mossad language for unfit to command. The radio fault, his domain, was quietly documented as an equipment anomaly, although every comms operator knew that meant human error somewhere in the chain. If the error was his, it would have cost lives. If it wasn't, it proved the system itself was brittle, and neither explanation protected him. Barak was promoted, but his promotion felt like a postponement of blame. In briefings, he defended operational choices, the quick fires, the single-entry timings, even the mercy toward the janitor. Every mission contains a ghost decision, he once told an interviewer years later. You make it without knowing you made it. That phrase haunted the agency, ghost decision. The moment you think you're improvising but in truth have already lost control. A Beirut was full of them. Institutionally, the operation intensified Mossad's paradox. Its successes demanded invisibility, yet invisibility demanded myths. Beirut proved the service could do the impossible. It also proved it could nearly implode doing it. In intelligence, the distance between those outcomes is measured in one decision delayed, one hesitation chosen, or one witness spared. The janitor, now faceless in reports, lived. Lebanese intelligence found him during the morning sweeps. He described foreigners in women's clothing, armed, silent. His statement reached the international press within days. For years after, that memory reappeared in rumors, novels, opposition speeches. His single act of survival became the detail that made denial impossible. That was the cost of mercy, evidence. For the country he served, Barak became both symbol and paradox, an officer who embodied the precision of vengeance and the fragility beneath it. Every newspaper photo that framed him as the young commander of success hid the exhaustion behind his eyes. And maybe that's what the operation really achieved. Not elimination, not dominance, but a template for the kind of victories that feed their own undoing. Perfect on the spreadsheet, poisoned in the bloodstream. History kept the posture of triumph. Films reimagined the night as a seamless ballet of disguise and revenge. But those who were there remembered the noise, the shattering glass, the half-sentences, the radio that spoke in static. In the archives, Beirut 1973 stands as a proof of reach. But between its lines, it reads like a warning about what happens when reach replaces reason. The mission didn't fail. It simply ended without clarity. And clarity in intelligence is the rarest form of victory. For those who still believe operations win wars, Beirut offers another truth. Every clean strike plants a dirty seed. It grows slowly, roots unnoticed, until the next generation inherits the confusion as doctrine. Some stories you study for inspiration. Others, like this one, you keep to remember restraint. This was one of those nights. Hidden Ops continues next, where another mission begins in the same illusion of control and ends the same way, in silence that never really ends.